Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons.
And this is Shelli Nelson.
Welcome to the Innovation and Digital Enterprise Podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders, giving you an insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations. Today, we're very excited to have Sean O'Kelly with us. I met Sean about 2 years ago through a mutual connection, and when we met, he was about a year into being the Chief Information Officer for the state of Illinois, focusing specifically in the Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. Before that, Sean had been at a wide range of organizations, but his background leans more towards the financial and consulting. Shelli and I are both really excited about having you on today, Sean.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, Sean, just to begin, would you mind digging into what your role was at the state of Illinois?
Sure. So in my role as Chief Information Officer, I was responsible for applications, infrastructure, operations, security, compliance for that particular department. The way the state is organized, it's very similar to the federal government. So you have information leaders that oversee each department, and then you report up to the overall state CIO, who's appointed by the governor. So that was my role. So financial and professional regulation kind of did two unrelated things. And each state packages departments differently. So this is just the way the state of Illinois decided to do it at some point in the past. But for financial regulation, the department was responsible for regulating all banks, credit unions, currency exchanges, money transmitters, title insurance, consumer credit outfits in the state, payday lenders, that sort of thing. And from an IT perspective, we had to essentially support a B2B interaction there. The state would charter or license those institutions to operate in the state, and then there were examiners that would go around periodically and perform audits of those institutions. So we had to support a B2B interaction there. Professional regulation was completely different. It's the regulation of and licensing of all professional licenses in the state. So there's something like 250 or 260 different license types, but in essence, it's all doctors, nurses, accountants, engineers, real estate agents, roofers, cosmetologists. It goes on for quite some time. Dentists. So from an IT perspective, we had to support a B2C interaction there, and we were one of the few agencies in the state that didn't really run off of tax revenue. It ran off of the license fees that were collected. So IT was responsible for somewhere in the range of 70 to 80% of all the revenue coming in to ensure that happened smoothly. I mean, my background coming into this role, I grew up in kind of classic consulting, Accenture, Deloitte, and then did quite a bit of work as a senior enterprise architect and as well as a leader in IT operations. But the last several years of my career, I spent really focusing on customer experience before even joining the state. And what I found in joining government is there was such a hunger, a demand, I should say, for better participation between those regulated entities and the government, better interaction. People in a B2C scenario, people wanted a better experience. They wanted better, more convenient interaction. And then in the B2B scenarios, it was largely about better data exchange, better content exchange. And so, but in either case, what you're doing is you're trying to drive a better, more frictionless interaction between those parties. And that to me was really front and center when I took the role and realized that there's just such a hunger for it's not that regulated entities or individuals didn't want to be regulated. I think generally people, at least from what I saw, people generally understood the need for reasonable oversight, but it was like, how do we make those interactions better?
So that's interesting. So on the B2B side, it would seem with that data exchange, it's not that they wanted it regulated. It's just the intrusion of having to go through an audit, the things that would slow down business, be a cost, not a value. And more on the B2B side, the user experience, because you're dealing with people. And I think we've all had to deal with certain elements of various governments where the website doesn't do what it's supposed to do, or even more so in the three-dimensional form. Nobody really enjoys the DMV. So I guess when you get into that modernization, and I think your words are citizen experience, and modernization, what is it that you're seeing that government is realizing? So what we've talked about in the past, government doesn't want to be big brother, but it does have a part to play, and specifically with the arena that you're in, the financial side, it's just a critical element. Adam Smith aside, right? There is a role for government in that. Anybody who's old enough to live through 2000 will testify to that fact. So, what are some of the things that you saw being done, and where do you see it going?
That's a great question. So let's start by defining the citizen experience, or what I call a citizen experience, which is really just an extension of the customer experience that you might talk about in the private sector. So when you talk about innovation, and in my mind, innovation comes from two basic places. You're either innovating what you're delivering, or you're innovating in the way you deliver it, or maybe some combination of the two. Oftentimes, innovation is, I would say, I don't have any numbers on this, but I would say that it's a little more heavily swayed toward how you deliver something rather than what is being delivered. So, for instance, you take Netflix. Netflix innovated in how content and movies and shows are delivered, but not necessarily the fact that we still watch shows. And so when we talk about the customer experience or the citizen experience, it really is just, in the end, in my mind, about process and data. Those are the two biggest things, followed by security and trust and transparency. Those things have to be there too. But it is about process and data in the end. And so think about this. We're from Chicago, right? I'm born and raised in this city. And so the city of Chicago has the parking mobile app that people use. I use it. Probably you use it too, I would imagine. So people love that, because what you used to have to do when you parked on the street is you had to feed a meter and you'd walk away, and at some point it would expire and you'd have to go back to your car, but that's really inconvenient. And maybe you got lucky and didn't get a ticket, but you could have if it expired and you didn't feed the meter. So now what you can do with the mobile app is you can just simply hook it to your credit card, pay, and there is still a timer on it, but you can renew it from the mobile app. You don't have to go back to your vehicle. To me, that's such a much better experience. And people, at least amongst my circle of folks, people generally really like that. Much better way to do it. So I think the experience people have with government, unfortunately, that happens in pockets where those experiences are really innovated. So the city of Chicago didn't change what was being done. You still have to pay to park on the street. They changed in the way that it was delivered. But unfortunately, I think for a lot of us, we still have the experience where you have to go somewhere, probably go to a facility, probably talk to a person, probably fill out lots of forms, probably have to provide lots of supporting documentation, depending on what you're doing. And so the question is how do we get from that place to something that feels a lot more modern? And from what I've seen, it's not that people don't want to comply with government activity or don't see the value in having some oversight in terms of what they're doing, but people have a lot of pressures put on them. They have a lot of tugs at their time. And so the question is how do we make those things faster? How do we make them more convenient? How do we improve that experience so that getting people to interact with government is more frictionless? Let's put it that way. And so when I think about modernizing government, it has to start with not from the technology perspective, not the back end, not what are we going to do with our data center, or what are we going to do with our network, or what it's not about what service bus are you going to use and that sort of thing. I think those are the enablers of really what the citizen experience you're trying to drive is. And so I think it really needs to start with a real close examination of what I call the citizen journey. And there might be multiple journeys. In fact, I know there are multiple journeys. So there really needs to be a real deep understanding of what that is in order to then determine what the technology should be to facilitate those things. If you look at, take a very specific example, the state of Illinois just recently passed legislation for recreational use cannabis. So my department, part of what we did was we regulated we licensed the dispensaries and the people that worked in those dispensaries. So the state of Illinois has had medical use marijuana for years, and so we were already in that business of licensing those facilities and those individuals. But with recreational use getting passed, that's going to be a separate license and a separate process to achieve those licenses. Some facilities will be dual use, some will be standalone recreational use. So the question is how do we improve that experience? It's a signature piece of legislation. It's something I think a lot of people are interested in and excited about. But the technology that currently exists is fairly old technology. So you have a lot of technical debt behind the scenes. You have a lot of risks that are growing there. And so in order to modernize, or the reason to modernize is not just because the technology is just getting old. That's a part of it. But as you have these new pieces of legislation and these new programs that you want to enable, the newer technology is gonna better position the government to enable those things and to create those, ultimately to create those better experiences that hopefully are smoother for citizens.
So you touched on the cannabis industry. As somebody who works downtown, I got to tell you, I'm really excited that they're finally taxing for something that's widely been going on for a long time. I used to count how many times I smelled pot just walking into work and wondering, why are we not taxing for this? So I'm excited that we're going to be driving some revenue through that. I guess some of the challenges that I would suspect are keeping up with the Joneses and the startup speed that everybody admires. You guys have real risks. So there's real challenges there. How do you think government is moving in a way that they can support that kind of structure and that kind of sensitive data? And the way I look at it is I assume that the breach is going to happen. I think we can all accept the fact that the new reality is your data is going to get taken. I don't see a way, unless you are completely off the grid, that your data is not going to get stolen. But that's not going to stop people from suing or pursuing legal ramifications for a government breach, right? So, from your experience, you look at what was going on with the state and other government organizations. Are they capable of making that switch? Are they going to be able to do that?
A lot of the focus over the last couple years, maybe even longer than that, prior to me coming into government, was on security for the exact reasons that you mentioned. And the government, the at least from what I saw, the government, the state is very good at security, and there was a lot of focus and investment in that area for exactly what you said. I mean, the government has to protect citizen information. There's no question about that. And a lot of that focus and attention has kind of led us to this point. So what in improving that security, once you get to that place, which I think the government is at a good, from what I saw, was at a good, place with the way we secured information. There's always things that can be done. No organization is perfect. Breaches do happen, but in general, the government definitely focused a lot on security. And there's statutory responsibility to protect information. It's not just like there is for corporations, and nonprofits. The government has statutory responsibility to protect information. I think my point here is that now that we're at that place where, generally speaking, the information is protected, the question is, how do we turn that attention to better experiences? This is true for any older organization, what I'm about to say. Some of my prior experiences with older, very, very older banks and financial institutions, it's not uncommon to go into an organization and see a mainframe that's still being run and actively being used. And that's true at the state too. And look, mainframes in their fundamental, I don't want to spend too much time picking on mainframes, but I'll spend just a moment on it. Fundamentally, they're very good at just at storing and capturing information. I mean, they're just, that's bread and butter IT going back to the 70s. But The problem is that if you want to create modern experiences, you really have to sort of build quite a bit of custom capabilities in order to connect those mainframes to modern front ends. So if you need to serve up data at a certain point in a process, if you need to capture data at a certain point in the process, if you need to run calculations, you have to build, as I'm sure you're aware, and your audience is aware. I mean, you have to build custom services, IT services, and custom APIs to connect the data in that mainframe to your front end. That is a lot of work. That's a heavy, heavy lift. So while you may hear some folks that say, well, for any older organization that would say, we're running these older mainframes, it's going to be really hard to get off of those. We need to figure out a way to work with them. That might be true, but the amount of work that you have to put in to get that data connected to modern front ends and modern enterprise tools is significant. And so you do have to kind of balance whether or not it makes sense to just say, okay, let's actually figure out how to come off of those mainframes and maybe get into more modern databases. But the way that you're serving up your process and your data in a secure way, that is fundamentally the citizen experience core to it. So here's another good example, and this goes back to that cannabis. When we talk about creating journeys of what you might, even in the private sector, when you talk about taking a customer through a certain journey, let's say it's a sales journey of some kind, or even a service journey, you want to update your address with your insurance carrier. Let's just say that. There's a journey associated with that. And you can map that out and you can ensure that's a solid experience for those customers. But when you aggregate that up into not just one organization, but now any number of regulated entities in a certain space, and then you've got the government that's responsible for oversight of all of those entities, the way the law gets written and the way that regulation occurs, you may end up having actual regulation that touches multiple departments along the way. So there's not really a very great analog for how you have multiple entities that have to go through a cross journey across multiple departments of the government. That's why we all notice and feel that sort of siloed experience, because you go to Department A and maybe they're responsible for manufacturing type activities, and you have to get a license to operate as a manufacturer of some kind. You go to Department B, and they might oversee sales type activities or distribution type activities, and then you might have to even go to a third department to get consumption type regulation. So cannabis again is a great example. You have the Department of Agriculture that you have to get a license for and provides enforcement for the growers, farmers, really, and the suppliers of the seeds. So that's Department A that you might have to go to. If you're also going to run a dispensary, then you have to come to financial and professional regulation to get essentially a distribution license. And then there's oversight there. And then finally, the Department of Public Health, at least in the case of medical cannabis, oversees, actually issues permits or licenses to consumers of medical cannabis, patients, because what they want to do is provide oversight to make sure that folks are not going to multiple providers and getting more cannabis than maybe they were prescribed. So there's good reasons for those things. I'm not saying there isn't, but the truth is that you have this whole delivery chain of regulatory activity, and you could even map out that journey, and that's a great start. But getting those departments to play well together and to interact and to have the right technology in place to facilitate that journey, I think is the next step as we look sort of beyond security and trust and what you had asked earlier. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting, Sean. And as you were talking about the culture, I mean, that seems like a huge cultural shift. And, just knowing your background, I was really impressed to hear that you were at the state, given your background at Deloitte and your own consulting and technology. Is that what they're looking to do now? Is bring in people with a unique set of experiences, bring that innovation in? Have you seen a shift in the 2.5 years you've been there?
So in the time that I was there was definitely that shift. There was a lot of push to do that. And so, again, just to use my experience as an example, the day I walked in the door in April of 2017, if you were applying for a medical license to be a doctor in Illinois, you had to print out a piece of paper, go to the website, download a PDF, print it out, handwrite it out, mail it in with a check. In the time that I was there, we put that functionality online. And so there was a push to do those things, and I certainly pushed to do those things. I think the challenge going forward, I do think the government is going to have to, in my view, continue to look for folks that can help do that, because that is the direction that I think citizens want. I think it's the direction that businesses do want. They want that less frictionless or more frictionless experience. I think we went from being fully on paper for professional licenses the day I walked in the door to 85% or not, somewhere between 85 and 90% of all applications now for new professional licenses in Illinois can be done online. And that reduced the amount of time that it took to get a professional license in Illinois by about, I think we calculated somewhere around 20 to 25% of time. So if it used to take, and I don't know what the numbers were when we were doing it all by paper, but somewhere around 12 weeks, you can now get it in about 8 weeks, which better aligns Illinois with the speed of other states. Now we did that on an older technology stack. I think part of what I was advocating for and pushing for was a larger technology plan to improve the technology stack and modernize so that we could take that from 8 weeks down to 4 weeks or 2 weeks, or who knows, even faster. But getting it below where it's at right now, it's going to be difficult to do that on older technology. So the state really has difficult choices to make about where, I think most citizens are fairly aware of the fiscal challenges the state has had. So I'm speaking as a citizen now. So the state has challenges around where to prioritize, budgets and funding and those sorts of things. But hopefully, Shelli, to your point, I think they are going to have to look for leaders who can think about those journeys, think about those experiences, and then determine what that actually means for the technology. And they're going to have to make difficult choices about where to invest, dollars at the state. But I think it does certainly start with thinking about how do we better serve those citizens.
And I'm also curious, Sean, what that experience was like coming out of the tech industry and going into the state. And, what was that decision-making process like for you? Were you concerned about the shift? And I guess maybe the innovation or the agility or that sort of thing.
Absolutely. All of it. I mean, you spend 20 years in the private sector, and then you go in government mid-career, and you're wondering how fast can you get things moving? How much can you actually get done in the time that you're there? Certainly you're thinking those things. I can say this, you know, to be fair, there's obviously different incentives at play. So in the private sector, I don't want to oversimplify it, but in general, in the private sector, you're doing one of three things. Your activities are geared toward driving revenue, lowering or managing cost, or managing risk. In my mind, that's it. The one or a combination of those three things are what you're doing. In government, there isn't a profit motive, obviously. So you kind of take that profit growth off the table. So you're really in the game of managing costs and managing risk. And so that is a huge shift in mindset, both in terms of coming into government as well as having to adjust to the realities of how that's different from the private sector. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
So, what did lead you there? Obviously, you're a successful guy with a lot of options. I think when we spoke, there was a real passion for you to participate in the process.
I think there were a couple motivations. It was a little bit of a different move, maybe not a move that others might have made, but I think for me, I've always been passionate about solving problems. And I find myself just very, very excited about working with good people and solving problems. And while you can do that in a lot of places, it just felt like at this point, government needed some help. It needed renewal. I would encourage any American or anybody to serve some time in government. It could use it, particularly if you have a technology background, for sure. I had some other personal reasons too. In terms of my leadership style, I tend to be very much believe in the servant leadership approach, and so I wanted to make sure that I was walking the walk. And when I was younger in my life, and I was applying for schools and looking to go to college, I went to the U of I in Champaign, and the state of Illinois, helped with some grants to help me do those things. And I was always very grateful for that. So I thought this is a time to serve and maybe, do my part and give back. So those were, from a career perspective, why I wanted to jump in and do my part, but also from a personal perspective.
I think that's pretty interesting. The whole concept of encouraging people to participate in government, I think that's great because I do think there's a profound lack of understanding of what the challenges are that government's faced with, how we as citizens could possibly make it possible for our government to be a better service to us. I think it's really inspiring to think that if we had more people participate in the process, it would create a stronger country overall by, tearing down that wall between the citizen and government.
Yeah, I mean, that's my point of view. I think everybody should spend some time in their careers in government, whether it's elected office or not. I would encourage anyone to do that. Government needs different perspectives, it needs constant renewal, and it needs, in my view, it needs good people who are just willing to serve for a little bit. It doesn't mean you have to spend the rest of your career there, but it does mean that, not to be corny, but if you believe in, as Lincoln said, of government of the people, by the people, for the people. I mean, you should be willing to participate for some point in your career.
That's great. I hope some folks out there start checking out some of these jobs. Unfortunately, I didn't do that, and it made me really think about some gaps in experience. Some of the other speakers that we've had on talked about how creating stronger leadership capabilities is done through having a diverse set of experiences, not just in roles, but in the organizations and the sizes, different industries, in many different ways. So, pivoting a little bit to more of the nerdy topics, if you're okay with it, for example, blockchain and some of those concepts and how you see them pertaining to government. I think a lot of people hear AI and the government and are reminded of thought police and mind control, 1984. So, how does government leverage these things and where do you see it going? What are your thoughts around all that?
Sure. So there are folks who are concerned about the thought police and government overstepping. We certainly always have to watch for that as citizens. But I think the big thing is to make sure that the law is clearly defined. At least in my experience in government, I was, and other folks, we were reading the law and then applying that to the technology that we were looking to leverage. That's the way it should work, right? That's the way government should work. That includes the capture of data, the protecting and security around that data, and the sharing of that data and the analysis around that data. Those things, in my view, should be crystal clearly defined in the law. And then as government looks to leverage technology to participate in larger ecosystems, that will be hopefully more, as clearly defined as possible. So there is an ambiguity there. In terms of how some of these emerging technologies are going to be leveraged, I think a lot of that is still to be determined. The three that I think come into play the most are probably blockchain, containers, and AI. I'll talk a little bit about containers and AI, but probably spend a little bit more time on blockchain. So in government, really the leveraging of blockchain comes down to kind of two things. It's going to be identity is the main probably use of blockchain in government, and then followed by regulatory compliance. And so what does that mean? You can think of identity in its broadest sense. Anything that exists in the real world can be represented in the digital world with a blockchain identity. The difference between blockchain and the way we do identity today with like classic Active Directories is that you can make that identity unique, and the cryptography around it prevents the copying of that identity. So if something is truly unique in the real world, then it can be uniquely represented in the digital world without any fear that you can make many copies of it. So for instance, you could look at a dollar bill, a currency. The reason cryptocurrencies exist or part of the reason that they exist, is because you can represent that dollar bill, which has a serial number on it, a unique serial number. So it already has a unique identifier in the real world, but you can now create a representation of that in the digital world without any fear that dollar bill could then become $10 bills or $100 bills. If that were the case, you would lose balance as to you would lose the ability to track that original dollar bill and what it could become in the digital sphere. So that's true for call it anything of value. So now extend that to an individual. You could represent Sean O'Kelly with an identity in the digital world on the blockchain. And now I can interact with any of the digital interactions that I choose to conduct myself in. I can interact in totally new and different ways. So whether it's going on to my bank and interacting, or to my insurance company and interacting, or to a retailer that I like to buy things from and interact, you can do that now with that digital identity. And one of the things that the hope is that will eliminate the need for IDs and passwords, because that you will already be recognized and verified on the blockchain. And so that includes interactions with government. As we look to improve the citizen experience, if that's one more way that you can now interact with government, and government can be certain that that person sitting on the other side of that screen is who they say they are, now you can offer up more services to citizens without them having to actually go somewhere and present themselves in person and fill out forms and provide supporting documentation all in person. You can do it through a digital mechanism. So in my mind, the hope with something like blockchain is that it's going to help facilitate better experiences down the road.
Those are really interesting things. There's a couple of organizations here in Chicago that I know are doing significant things with blockchain. Some, financial organizations that I think you and I are both familiar with. Is there an organization that's really starting to move on this, that's showing some real promise? Is there at the state or maybe some other level organization?
So with regards to blockchain, the organizations where I spend my time is in terms of standards and concepts and definitions is open source, Hyperledger for sure. That's one of them. I think Ethereum is also a place where you can go if you want to learn more as well. But I would recommend either of those two. In terms of governments themselves, I'm aware of some proofs of concept happening in certain pockets, but I'm not aware of anything sort of rolled out en masse at this point. I'm aware of even some internal pilots that are happening in places, but the technology is probably a little too early to really roll it out en masse. But so to the citizen, though, it's not going to feel a lot different. You're still going to go to a website and interact. The blockchain is going to be something that helps facilitate those interactions a little bit more in the background. Not too unlike the early days of the internet, when the TCP/IP protocol was determined to sort of be the standard. I think that will be part of the role that the blockchain plays.
That's awesome. Well, I think we could keep this going for another hour and a half. Maybe I can get you come back another time if you're open to that.
If you'll have me, I'd be happy to come back.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Awesome. Sean, do you mind sharing a way that listeners can connect with you if they're interested in learning more?
Yeah, please find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I think it's a great tool. So Sean T. O'Kelly, please connect.
Well, Sean, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with us today. It really means a lot. Your experience is unique, and I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and where you see things going.
Thank you so much for having me join you and Shelli. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Sean.
We also want to thank our listeners. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today.
And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast, or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.